What are some less known, darker facts about beloved countries? The Dutch once ate their prime minister. Norway used to suppress the natives from up north, by separating them from their parents and forcing Norwegian culture upon them. Learning Norwegian and how to live like a Norwegian. France had concentration camps in 1936 for Spanish immigrants who fled the Civil War. If you've ever looked at a country like Liechtenstein on a map and wondered how a country that small can maintain a flourishing economy, the answer is that they're one of the largest offshore banking sites in the world. Most people only think of the Cayman Islands when it comes to offshore banking, but the Cayman Islands aren't even close to being the only place where rich people stash their money to avoid paying taxes on it. Most of the places that do it are territories and not countries. The Cook Islands, Anguilla, Jersey and Guernsey are a few other big offshore banking sites, but Liechtenstein has made it the core of their economy. During World War II, the Swiss National Bank accepted large quantities of gold from the German Reichsbank as payment for Swiss export shipments, weapons, ammunition. A large part of this Reichsbank gold had either been looted by the German occupying forces from the stocks of the occupied countries, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, etc., or it came from the victims of the Nazi persecution of the Jews, Holocaust / Spain created over 50 new torture methods in the past 300 years. New Zealand has one of the highest youth suicide rates in the OECD. Netherlands slaved the shit out of Africans. And the Belgium did some shit in Africa that would make Joseph Mengele go, "Whoa, calm down buddy." During World War II, Japan used living POWs for bayonet practice. On Toronto's beaches up to the mid-1950s, it was common to see signs that read "No dogs or Jews allowed." Scrolling through these comments feels like when your family thinks you're old enough they start letting you in on the dark family secrets. Bhutan forcibly expelled Hindus in order to create its happy paradise. Canada has an incredible racist history involving taking Aboriginal children from their homes and bringing them to residential schools where they were beaten, underfed, and forced never to speak their language. Many of them died. Ireland has to this day still not recovered population-wise from the British-imposed famine of the mid-19th century. In around 1910, the Australian government decided it was a good idea to steal Indigenous children from their mothers and send them to schools to be taught. Some of them never even saw their parents again. They were called the Stolen Generation. Canada is the biggest producer of asbestos in the world, although using the product is banned in the country. New Zealand, high rates of child abuse, hidden poverty and a housing crisis on the brink. Not enough housing, and what there is extremely expensive to both rent and buy and rapidly rising at a ridiculous rate. It's also not particularly high quality. In Canada, there's a guy called Scott. He's a DK. Spain expelled the Jews in the 1490s. No Jewish children were born in Spain again until the 1960s. Don't ask Germany how it got those borders. For all the weeaboos out there, look up Unit 731. Canada had a cult leader named Rockdare of Ant Hill Kids who did some very disturbing things to his followers and the children. https://n.m. Wikipedia.org/wiki/rock_th%c3%a9 Rialt. Also, the podcast cults had an episode on them, but they even left out the worst things they did. In Canada, the police would frequently take Native men for midnight tours or starlight drives where they would drive them miles out of town and kick them out of the car. This happened in the middle of winter and they would take their coats and oftentimes boots as well before they kicked them out. From the 1700s up to 1996, Ireland was home to Magdalene laundries. In parts of Colombia, it's tradition to have sexual relations with female donkeys as a way of practicing safe sex before marriage. In Argentina, the right-wing government took the babies of pregnant left-wing prisoners and adopted them into military families during the Dirty War. England has held India captive in their own country for over 200 years, but that's not all. Protests against us Brits were suppressed brutally, the most notable one being shushing down the protest meeting at Jallianwala Bagh in 1919. The park had a very narrow exit, and a large number of people were there. What General R. E. H. Dyer's forces did: they blocked the narrow exit and fired at all the people. Thousands of innocent children, women and men died. What were our ancestors thinking? During World War II, Canada turned away fleeing Jewry, Romanians, and Gypsies seeking asylum from the horrors of the Nazi Party. They didn't believe their claims of what was happening until near the end of the war when the camps were discovered. Evidently everyone was a DK to their natives. Here in Colombia we have enough material to have a dedicated post, but for mentioning one. In 1928, A banana company workers ceased their production and got in protests. They wanted better work conditions because they worked a lot for the crap of payment they got. The government's response was send the National Army to shoot a place where between 2,000 and 4,000 people were sleeping or relaxing. Officially 13 people died, but the people there told that number was faked and the death counter was a lot higher. In some states in the US, child brides are legal. There's over 200 child brides, some of them being like 13 years old. A whole lot of rape, murder and deception. That's every country though. The Holocaust wasn't Germany's only genocide of the 20th century. https://n Wikipedia org/wiki/Herero_and_Namakwa_genocide. Not enough people know about the Islamic Revolution in Iran, IMO, more pitied than beloved nowadays, but it was a nice and rather free country before, especially for women. They were able to vote, were encouraged to get education. Women and men mixed freely, and even 6 women were elected in parliament prior to it. Mosquitoes in Brazil can literally kill you from 1 out of 5 illness. Belgium is a pretty chill place, post Leopold II. Germany went through a period where they did a bunch of racist shit in the 1930s and early 1940s. During World War I, Poles were drafted by both sides with the promise that upon victory their nation would be restored from the partition that had destroyed it decades earlier. Hundreds of thousands of Poles killed each other trying to free their homeland. Japanese army raped women from South Korea and China. I recommend you to see the documentary. Anyway, they raped the women at a ratio of 70 men to single women. If women get pregnant, they either kill the baby because if babies might rebel against Japanese army. In the center of the capital of my country there is a Lenin's palace that Stalin built. Now it is called the Palace of Science and Culture. I'm just scrolling through looking for people talking about Ireland. New Zealand has crippling mental health, poverty and housing issues which many gloss over because Jacinda Ardern exists. Hi, German here, and I've just googled to see if there is anything I can add about our beloved country, and you will not believe some of the shit I've just found out. The Kingdom of Hawaii, long before they were a state, was illegally overthrown by the US government in the late 19th century. Since then, Hawaii has only gotten a single apology from Bill Clinton 100 years later. The partition riots in India, the British finally withdrew. Pakistan and India's partition lines were created, and up to 4 million people died in warfare. Everyone knows about the Nazis, but not enough people know about Unit 731 of the beloved country, Japan. They used to conduct lethal experiments on people without consent or anesthesia. They forced women from their occupied territories into sex work. This information is often skimmed over or not taught at all in Japan, and there are many war crime apologists who are in denial of this. Japan still owes a thorough apology to the comfort women in their countries. The White Australia policy. Up until a few decades ago, the Australian government was actively trying to wipe out its entire Aboriginal population by stealing children from their parents and giving them to white families where they would eventually breed with white people and the country would eventually have a fully white population. Aboriginal people also weren't legally considered humans in Australia until the 1960s. Australia has somehow been able to convince the world that it's a laid-back, happy country despite having one of the most oppressed minority populations in the entire world. In Egypt, sexual harassment is like the air, everywhere. Something every woman must live with. Apart from the long list of things done to our indigenous population, Australia had a practice in place called blackbirding, which was effectively slaving in the South Pacific. In France, the last time a guillotine was used for execution, the first Star Wars was in theaters. Japan, there are restaurants who have official policies to legally refuse to serve non-Japanese patrons. Germany's efficiency is blocked by ignoring digitalization for many years. Our political system is corrupt as hell, and even though we have a social system with healthcare, the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger. It gets fucked up more and more every year, but for some reason all people that I meet when traveling think that we Germans living in a country full of efficient and happy workers. Canada is pretty dark between November to March. Winter and all, you know that everything you love was built off the assumed worthless class of people who are expected to just be okay with it. Finns killed 3% of their own population in concentration camps after civil war in 1918. We also sent Jews to Germany during World War II and still are one of the most racist nations in Europe. If you were born when the United States of America was founded, and only aged when they were not at war, you would not be old enough to run for U.S. president. The USA has, functionally, always been at war. The reason that Ireland is the land of the potatoes and the potatoes are staple crop is because many centuries ago the British owned the land and forced the Irish to work. They were left with small plots of land. The potato is one of the best crops for how much it can grow in a small space, especially considering the climate of Ireland. So potatoes being part of Irish culture is because it was the only plant they wouldn't starve with. Croatia was really close to Germany in World War II and had their own concentration camps just for Serbs, and sometimes only for Serbian children. The British Navy once attacked Copenhagen, sank half the Danish fleet, stole the other half and burned 75% of Copenhagen to the ground despite not being at war. They did it just in case the Danes decided to side with Napoleon. You know, just in case. This also coined the term Copenhagenization for attacking someone you are at peace with preemptively, just in case.